Please come to the front. Sure.
So if you're young, please come up to the front so we can see you clear. Hello everyone, we're going to begin our program today. First off, I'd like to welcome you all here today and welcome the Sikyong Penpa Tsering to Minnesota and to one of our community centers here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Looking at the crowd, I see that we are a very diverse group of young people, ranging from high school age students to college age students to young professionals here. It's a really diverse mix here, so thank you all for making it. And I don't want to take up too much time, but without further ado, I will request Sikyong Penpa Tsering to begin the program. And I thank everyone for being here today and making time on this hot, humid day because you want to show support and also at the same time engage with Sikyong. And I really appreciate Sikyong Penpa Tsering for making the time for young people. As we all know, it takes a village to raise a child, and we are engaging with our young people today because it is important and you see that it's important. So, take it away.
To start with, I want to say sorry, we are late because we were discussing about another program which was meant to be 5 minutes discussion, but it went on for a little more than half an hour. So, to do, I think we're a little short of time, right? To do, so how do we try to keep it interactive? I've always said that I consider my generation as the bridge generation between the generation that came from Tibet and the younger generations like you. And you are the future of Tibet and the Tibetan people. And you are the future Sikyongs, future ministers, future Tibetan members of parliament. So I consider it very important that we meet and talk about things so that we have communication going on. Because once we lose you, then the Tibetan cause is also gone. And the reason why the 1,000 Tibetans were sent from India, Nepal and Bhutan to United States is not only for the generation that came here to survive or economically survive, but also to sustain ourselves as a movement. So to do that, it's very important that the younger generation continue to take up the responsibility. And to take up the responsibility, you have to understand the situation inside Tibet. So you should empower yourself to be able to represent the Tibetans inside Tibet. And to do that, you have to understand the situation inside Tibet. So what we have tried to do in Dharamsala after we took over since last year was to restructure our political institutions. In the last 20 years, we have lagged behind in studying and analyzing the situation inside Tibet. Now we need to refocus on what is going on inside Tibet so that we are in a better position to talk about the situation in Tibet to the outside world, whether it's governments, parliaments, or think tanks, or media, or to the general public. And to start with, for younger generations, the ones who are going to the universities or who are graduating from school, you will eventually be meeting a lot of other people. And if people ask you, where are you from, whether you like it or not, in this life, your flesh, your bone, and blood is all Tibetan. Whether you are American citizen or Canadian citizen or a citizen of any other European country where there are quite a number of Tibetans. So we have now reoriented the work of the Department of Security in Dharamsala, which used to be mainly responsible for the security of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now that His Holiness is traveling less, even though Department of Security is quite busy, but then we have decided to entrust the work of collecting information from inside Tibet to this department. It has become more difficult now, more challenging, because till 2007-8 we used to receive between 2,500 to 3,000 Tibetans every year from inside Tibet. And those who want to join monasteries, we send them to monasteries. Younger kids, we send them to schools. And then those who want to go to pilgrimage, they go to pilgrimage and then return back to Tibet. And the younger ones stay back in India to study, not knowing whether they will ever meet their family again or not. So that is the kind of risk they take to come into India to study. Now, since 2008, I'm sure you know what happened in 2008 when there was large-scale demonstrations in Tibet, participated by people from all walks of life. That was a big shock to the Chinese government. Since that time, the number of Tibetans coming into exile were dwindling down, and also because of the pandemic in the last 2 years, we had only 5 people in 2020 from Tibet, and in 2021 only 10 people, and this year we're still counting, but it's only 4 people. So that also means that nobody can go inside Tibet as of now. So the flow of information has become more difficult. Even though the situation is challenging, we are looking at every opportunity and also using all kinds of technology to get more information inside Tibet. Now, the information that is gathered by the Security Department will be processed by another section of the Department of Information and International Relations called the Tibet Policy Institute. So they analyze these informations, and the Department of Information and International Relations will turn this analytical information into advocacy materials. We have also restructured a little bit about the functionings of the offices of Tibet. We have one office in Japan. That's how we reach out to the world. One in Japan responsible for East Asia, one in Taiwan only for Taiwan, one in Canberra for Australia, New Zealand and some parts of Southeast Asia, one office in Delhi from Thailand to Middle East, but we are not able to go beyond India. We have one office in Nepal only for Nepal, and then one office in Moscow for Central Asia, then 3 offices in Europe, Geneva, Brussels and London, to reach out to the northern, central and southern Europe. One office in Pretoria for the whole of Africa, but we are not able to go beyond South Africa. Then one office in DC for the whole of North America, and one office in Sao Paulo for South America. So our resources are very limited, both human as well as financial. So far the representatives are also responsible to deal with the Tibetan communities. Wherever there is a sizable number of Tibetans in any part of the world, we do have a Tibetan association, just like you have in Minnesota, but Minnesota is one of those places where you have mid-range number of Tibetans. The larger ones are New York, Toronto, France, Switzerland, some of these few countries. So that's how we try to reach out to the international community. It's quite challenging, but now we are asking the representatives to focus more on the governments, the parliaments, think tanks and media, so that we can be more effective. And if we have more focused advocacy, then that will also yield that kind of result. So we have decided to create one position in Washington, D.C. to work with the Tibetan Association separately, so that the representatives in those offices can focus more on advocacy with governments. As Central Tibetan Administration, as Sikyong, I try to reach out to governments as much as possible. We also have a minister for the Department of Information and International Relations and the whole departmental setup to work with the international community, but our capacity is quite limited. Therefore, we decided to engage our youth, galvanize the whole Tibetan community to work for the cause. And so far, in the last 60 years, it has been one and only His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So His Holiness' effort in the last 60 years sustained our movement. Now it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our cause is carried through. Now, one of the reasons why we survive, or our Tibetan struggle continues to sustain, is because of the far-sighted vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama way back in 1959-60, after we came into exile. His Holiness requested the Indian Prime Minister to set up separate Tibetan rehabilitation centers, compact communities. That's why, because of the compact communities, we managed to have our educational institutions, cultural institutions, monastic institutions, and because of which our people still speak the language. We are still in a position to tell the world that we are here. Now that is also being challenged, because lot more younger people are going out. When I say younger people, people who can give birth, people who can have productive labor, they are all going out. So it's mostly the elder generation of Tibetans who live there. And in the last few months, I have been traveling around India, visiting each and every single camp and each and every single institution, even though I have traveled to all these places before. But now, with the added responsibility, not just of Sikyong, but also the Department of Home, Health, Finance, and Religion and Culture, because we still have not been able to nominate all other ministers. Right now, we have, apart from the Sikyong, there are 3 other ministers. All are ladies, so we are very much on to women empowerment, not just talk the talk, but walk the talk. And we also aim to appoint 50% of the representatives, women representatives. So far, we have already appointed 3 after I came into office. So the new initiative that we have taken up, and what we launched this in Zurich last year, November 5th. The program is called Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group. So in short, it's WeTag. That's meant for all the Tibetans, irrespective of age. So nobody can say that I wanted to do something, but I didn't get a platform to work for Tibet. So the platform is already there, right? But it should be driven largely by the younger generation. That is our hope. So now, to engage with the younger generation, it's very important that you understand that we Tibetans are different. We have an added responsibility. So you cannot compare yourself to other students in your school. You should understand that our country is still under occupation by the Chinese. Our brothers and sisters, our relatives are still struggling, still suffering inside Tibet. Chinese government under President Xi Jinping now, if we go back into history, it's going to take a lot more time, but under President Xi Jinping, he's talking about one nation, one culture, one language. So the whole world is going towards multiculturalism, but China is going backwards. And they have also started many colonial boarding schools, as what the West calls it. And when you talk about these things, they point at the United States, saying, how did United States treated its own native people? So when Canada says something, they point at Canada and say, how did Canadians treated their own First Nation people? and which means to say that they know what the Canadians did and what the Americans did earlier was wrong, but they're doing the same thing to the Tibetans. So according to the Tibet Action Institute, a non-governmental organization who researches things like this inside Tibet, it's estimated that about 78% of the Tibetan young Tibetan children are in colonial style boarding schools. So they are kept away from their family. So keeping them away from the family also means that they don't learn the way of life of the older generation. And they are taught only in Chinese. Now they have gone back, even Montessori education starts with Chinese. So this is a very serious issue for us. Another 15, 20 years down the line, we may not have younger generation of Tibetans who speak Tibetan. Now, even if you are well versed in Tibetan, it's very difficult to get jobs because they have changed the recruitment rules. Even if you are good in Tibetan, that doesn't ensure you a job. So all these measures are aimed at eradication of the identity of the Tibetan people, whether it's to do with language or whether it's to do with religion or way of life or Tibet's environment, because we call ourselves the land of heavenly abode. We recite this in our prayers. So it's a heavenly abode surrounded by snow mountain ranges. Then Westerners started calling Tibet as the roof of the world because of Tibet's altitude. Tibet has an altitude of about 12,000 feet above sea level, average altitude. The highest are above 18,000 feet. So I think it was an American first who wrote a book in 1906 because he was in Tibet before, and one of his chapter was titled as Roof of the World. So since that time, Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world because of its altitude. And Asians called Tibet as the fountain of Asian rivers or source of Asian water. So all these rivers that flow into India, Pakistan, the Indus, the rivers that come into India and Bangladesh, the Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy that goes into Burma, rivers, Mekong that flows into Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Yangtze and Yellow that flows into China. All these major rivers of Asia originate from Tibet or from the Tibetan plateau. Now today, Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole, North Pole, South Pole, and Tibet Pole. Why? Because Tibet has the largest reserve of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers. So environmentally, Tibet is not only crucial for the Tibetans, but for the whole region. Some environmentalists estimate that about 1.8 billion people are directly or indirectly dependent on rivers that flow or originate from Tibet. So these are just to give you an overview. And history-wise, I would urge you to read books on Tibetan history. Just 5-6 books should be enough. 2 books from Tibetan sources, 2 books from Chinese sources, 2 books from Western sources. Then you will get a fair enough idea to make a judgment of the historical Tibet. Just to give you a brief overview, from 7th to 9th century, Tibet was an empire comparable to Mongols and Chinese those days. So you are talking about King Songtsen Gampo, King Trisong Deosen, Chirabachen. So these are the 3 major kings between 7th to 9th century, during which time we even conquered the capital of China. At that time it was Xi'an, not Beijing or Nanjing. We even conquered up to Uzbekistan, and present days Uzbekistan, place called Samarkand. Even up to there, our army went and invaded. But after 9th century, Tibet disintegrated for 400 years. But then there was a revival of Buddhism during this period, where the Sakya tradition and the Kagyu tradition were formed during that period. Then the relations with the Mongols started. During the time of period of disintegration, when the Mongols came to invade Tibet in 1220, we surrendered because we didn't have a major leader. It was all small principalities and we surrendered. That's why our people were not massacred, because otherwise Genghis Khan's army was known for massacring people, killing people, and then subduing them. Then 100 years of Sakyong's rule, then 100 years of Pamodukpa's rule. That was considered the golden period of those times. Chanju Gyaltseng was the leader at that time. And then another 100 years of Rinpoche's, 100 years of Devatsangpa's, so which comes to 17th century. Then 1642, the fifth Dalai Lama took political and religious responsibilities. So during all this period, you have to compare our history with the Chinese history, because China claims its sovereignty over us. So when we had a relation with the Mongols, our relation with the Mongols started much before Kublai Khan invaded China, and Kublai Khan became a Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. So you should be in a position to argue back to the Chinese students or intellectuals or scholars, whoever talks about Tibet being part of China. Then from 1368 to 1644, that was the Ming dynasty of China. And Ming dynasty's time falls during the Pamodukpa's, Rinpoche's and Devatsangpa's of Tibet. So at that time, we didn't have much relation with the Chinese Empire. Then, fifth Dalai Lama took over the political and spiritual responsibility of Tibet in 1642, but the Manchus came only in 1644. So there's a 2 years difference if you look at history. And today, even today, in China, there are a lot of intellectual debates as to who is a real Chinese. And sometimes they claim that Mongols are Chinese. If that is the case, then Genghis Khan invaded half of Europe. Then China today can claim half of Europe as their territory. So there are so many questions, so many things that you will need to understand, you will need to know to be in a position to explain to other people what Tibet was historically, what is happening in Tibet today, and where we are planning to go from now. So with that in mind, we developed this structure in Dharamsala so that we will be in a good position to be able to provide the right kind of information to the younger generation of Tibetans who could be potential advocates for the cause of Tibet. And you are the ones. If you don't take up the responsibility, if you don't take part in the activities of the Tibetan community here or the future course of the Tibetan movement, then there's nobody. All the efforts of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the last 60 years would go to waste. Right now it falls on our generation. I am about 57 right now, right? The older generation that came from Tibet, they were not educated. Very few people were. Those who studied in monastic institutions were educated, but all other normal people were not educated at all. They didn't know anything. They had no skill. When we came into exile, they were, the only thing we knew, your grandparents, my parents, only thing they knew was hard labor. So we were put up in the foothills of Himalayas because the other areas where Tibetans were resettled in the beginning, like Misamari and Buxar in West Bengal, was too hot. Climatic conditions were not suitable for the Tibetans who came from Tibet. We didn't speak any Indian languages, even though Tibetan came from India. Tibetan language came from India. Tibetan religion also came from India. Our people didn't speak any Indian languages. The climatic condition was not, the diet was not suitable. So many people died. And to avoid that situation, our people were put up in the foothills of Himalayas for road construction. So despite all these difficulties, the first generation of Tibetans worked really hard, going on the street, campaigning for Tibet, protesting, things like that. And then, of course, with the leadership of His Holiness Dalai Lama. we managed to survive thus far. Right? Now we are facing this challenge of more Tibetans moving out, less Tibetans in India, Nepal and Bhutan. So now we have to learn to turn the challenges into opportunities. The opportunity is that you have become citizens of the United States. Some other Tibetans have become citizens of Canada. Many other Tibetans have become citizens of European countries, and also Australia, Japan, somewhere else. So now we are scattered in more than 20 different countries, and we have become citizens of those countries. So as citizens, as voters, you have the right to ask your representatives, ask your senators to do what you want them to do. And you could yourself be a leader in this country and take up the cause of Tibet. Just like some Tibetans are already taking part in elections. We have one in Cleveland, we have one in Toronto, we have several in Switzerland, because Switzerland is one of our oldest communities. So those challenges are very much there. So I would urge you, the younger generation, I know some of them have, when they were younger, president and they started their own organization. So the community is trying its best to give as much education about Tibet to the younger generations as much as possible. But then there are limitations also. Everybody has to earn a living. So today, just before coming here, Darala is here. He is one of the oldest in Minnesota who was responsible for moving the first batch of Tibetans, among the 1,000 Tibetans here to Minnesota. Now a lot more are moving in here. So this has a lot of potential to become a big Tibetan community. So we were talking about charters, possible charter schools for Tibetans, so that we can live together, we can learn Tibetan. I know many of you have problems speaking Tibetan because that's not your fault. But then if you take up more responsibility, then you will also understand that it's very important for you to speak Tibetan, because it's only 6 million Tibetans, or close to 7 million Tibetans in Tibet who speak the language, who use the language. Over and above the Tibetans, now you have the Himalayan region people who learn Tibetan and speak Tibetan and join Tibetan monasteries. We have about 288 monasteries registered with the Religion and Culture Department, with about 42,000 monks and nuns. But out of that, 66% are Indians and Nepalese. Only 33% are Tibetans, and that number is also coming down slowly. Right? And the 16th Kashak is focusing a lot more on numbers now, statistics. So in the next 2 months, we are going to conduct a demographic survey, not a complete census, but right now when Westerners come to Dharamsala, leaders come to Dharamsala, and the first question is, how many Tibetans are there in exile or diaspora? And I have always to say, I'm sorry, I don't know. So I'm ashamed also to say that, because Tibetans don't care about numbers. But for me, numbers are very important. For one, we have to be in a position to tell others that we have that many number of Tibetans in the United States, or particularly in Minnesota, we have that many numbers. So in the next 2 months, we are going to conduct this survey, and I would urge you to take leadership roles, the younger generation, to join with the Tibetan community, offer your services, so that you will also get an understanding of how many Tibetans are there in Minnesota. When we started looking at numbers of students also, you will be astounded to find that in 2012, we had little more than 20,000 Tibetan students in India, Nepal and Bhutan. But when I took over last year, in 2021, from 20,000 in 2012, it had come down to 9,700 Tibetan students. And that's a drastic fall. If you draw a graph, another 10 years down the line, there may not be Tibetan students. Right? So why it happened? Because now less number of children coming from Tibet, more people out migrating from India, Nepal and Bhutan, and then low birth rate. So all these are three contributing. Before my visit to United States last month, I was visiting the three central Indian states where we have settlements, and a settlement called Bandara, they claim to have about 1,200 people there, but in reality it may be only about 600, 700 people. There was not one single new birth in last year in Bandara settlement, which means to say that one whole class is gone. Right? So now for long term, in India we are thinking about integrating schools. Schools run by Tibetan Children's Villages, they have 16 schools. Now we have to see how to integrate those. Schools run by Tibetan Homes Foundation, schools run by Samboda School Society. Though now we have taken over all the schools from the Indian government. We are running it on our own. We have the capability, but the number of students are going down drastically. So we have to understand all this, and that's why numbers are important for us to make a good guesstimate of future. If we have numbers, then we know how it's going to move forward. If we can if we just make guesstimates, then it's, you never know. When you ask Tibetans, either they will say, they say that mi mangbo 가져요래, mi 가져요래나, 야면은 망보 요래래 그래. 야면은 유뉴 요래래 그래. 딱 달라배요 만에. No exact numbers. So I'll stop here with an overview like this. Okay, maybe I'll add a little more on the narration that we have taken over, because Chinese propaganda is so strong that if you don't study Tibetan history, nobody will be able to argue back with the Chinese whenever the opportunity arises. Chinese have been saying that Tibet is part of China since 7th century, 13th century, 18th century, at different times, different periods. Now they are saying Tibet is part of China since time immemorial. So when is time immemorial? And when we talk about negotiation through the middle way approach, they ask His Holiness to say that Tibet is part of China, or that His Holiness should say that Taiwan is part of China. Now who are we to decide for Taiwanese people? Now His Holiness, being a Buddhist monk, cannot lie, and he always comes up with very innovative answers. So what His Holiness said was that I'm not a historian. Let us leave history to historians. What concerns us more is the future of the Tibetan people. So on that basis, in the last 1.5 years, two scholars, non-Tibetans, one is Michael Van Walt van Praag. He is also based in San Diego. He had written a book called Tibet Brief 2020. Have any of you seen this book or read this book? Nobody. So that is the level of interest from the Tibetan side on Tibetan history. So Tibet Brief 2020 is, if you look at the cover, it'll look like you are going to an eye clinic. He believes that Tibetan history is very blur. So it starts with very small letters, and then it becomes bigger and becomes 2020 clear. So what he did was, in the last 8 years, unfortunately, the Western world always looked at Chinese sources for history of East Asia. So that so what he has done is he has met with or discussed with, had meetings, many rounds of discussions with about 70, 80 scholars, historians from inner Asia, not just China, Japan, Mongolia, Russia, all these countries over the last 8 years. And he concludes in that book by saying whether it's the Mongolian order, because the idea of nation state, a modern nation state, is different from what used to prevail in Asia those days. So whether it's the Mongolian order or the Ming order or the Manchu order or the Tibetan order, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. He proves that in his book. And there's another professor called Professor Lau Han Tin. He's a Chinese, And he used to be a professor in the City University of Hong Kong. Now he's retired and he also lives in San Diego in the United States. Now he wanted to write from Yuan Dynasty, from the Mongols to Ming to Manchus, but since he's quite old, he wanted to focus first on the Manchu period. So that's from 1644 to 1911. And he establishes the fact, based on Manchu imperial historical records, on their own records. Now, if you watch Chinese Kung Fu movies, you will find that in the movies of later times, the protagonists are always Chinese and the antagonists are always Manchus. So Chinese themselves don't treat Manchus as Chinese, right? So within that period also, as per the imperial historical Chinese records of the Manchus, Tibet has never been considered part of China. So these two books, it's not the Tibetans saying that Tibet was independent. It is non-Tibetans, one Chinese professor saying that Tibet was an independent country. Now that our narrative is not very strong in the international community, we have not been able to match China's narrative. So we have to change tack now. So the reason why His Holiness climbed down from independent status to Tibet, asking for autonomy through the middle way approach, is based on reality, on many years of analyzing the situation, right? So that we are able to at least preserve our identity. For us to have the freedom to use our language, to practice our religion, to live the way that we want to live the life that we want to live, the way of life. Right. So I tell now all governments, whenever I visit other governments, I tell them, when you say that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China, you are going against international law. Because the one agreement that we have with PRC, the communist government, the People's Republic of China, is the 17-point agreement. This 17-point agreement was signed after invasion of Chamdo. So any agreement post-aggression cannot be considered legal because it cannot be fair under international law. So you are going against international law. And then when you keep saying at the behest of Chinese government that Tibet is part of PRC, then that also means that you do whatever you want in Tibet. That's why China also always keeps saying it's a national issue, domestic issue. His Holiness Dalai Lama is trying to internationalize it. So these two things, and on the other hand, governments say that they support negotiation between His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. Now these two, I say, are contradictory, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand inside Tibet, and the international community does not respond. Right? Look at what is happening to Ukraine today. Everybody draws a red line, and then people are being killed there like cats and dogs, and the whole world is watching. If that is the case with Ukraine, then how will the international community face China? Right? Then there is the larger question as to why China is always asking other countries to say that Tibet is part of PRC if it has already been historically a part of China. Because China knows that they lack legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. So we have to challenge that. That is the Achilles heel of China. That is their weakness. So we have to fight there. So we have to keep asking this question. Does China have legitimacy? So that's why I tell the international community, if there is one group that can grant legitimacy over Tibet, it can only be His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people, not the international community. So this is the argument that we are putting forth right now. Some leaders are taken aback by our statements, but that's a fact, right? And to gain some leverage for the middle way approach, we are mentioning these facts of the historical status of Tibet. So in the next few days, we are going to have the World Parliamentarians Convention of Tibet in Washington, D.C. And on the second day, that's 23rd of June, for the first time, we'll have a hearing on the historical status of Tibet in the Congress. This is happening for the first time by experts, particularly those two people. I think both of them are coming, aside from some more who will be invited by the committee to depose their testimonies, the expert testimonies in the US Congress. So to do all this, if the younger generation of you take part in the WETAC campaign, whether you follow independence or autonomy doesn't make difference. The official position is autonomy, middle way. So when you explain, you can explain about the middle way first, and individually, if you follow independence, you can say that. I don't find any contradiction in that. We have spent a lot of time fighting amongst ourselves, middle way, Rangzhen, this, that. Let's forget that now. We have to refocus on how to take the Tibetan movement forward. And this is, now we have to galvanize all the whole of the Tibetan community, whether it's rich or poor, those who live in the United States, Canada, or India, Nepal, doesn't matter. I'm seeking your involvement. So to begin with, you have to get involved yourself with the Tibetan community first. Listen to the elderly people, work with them. You have better ideas, you have better strategies, you can do better things than our generation has done. I'm a very ordinary Tibetan, son of a farmer. We worked very hard on the field when we were kids. Now for your generation, you have all the time to study. So you should be 100 times better than us. You know. So with my background, if I can be Sikyong, if I can, you know, shoulder to shoulder sit with any leader in the world and talk about things, then you can be much more better. And that's my expectation from you. Okay, I don't know how much time is left, but if you have any particular questions, I'll be happy to address that.
Can you tell me a little more about the charter school?
Kagi?
Charter school.
Charter school. Charter school is still very much at a nascent stage. I have talked about these things, not necessarily the charter school, but we have talked about, like, okay, we have a certain number of Tibetans, little more than 2,000, some say 3,000. We still don't know. So maybe in 2 months' time, we will know exactly how many Tibetans are there in Minnesota and how many school-going children are there, apart from those who attend the Sunday or Saturday schools, right? So we need to know comprehensively the numbers, because what is most important for charter school is students. So the students should be interested, the parents should be interested. So this is what we discuss in the evening also. First, there should be a meeting of parents who have children, right? So there should be a minimum level of interest to start something. So those. So I was told that every state has different rules for charter schools. So somebody had done a study on a charter school proposal for a charter school in New York. So that I read, and today I'm hearing with Dalala and his wife and one consultant from another institution, a lady, Patricia, right? She was there. So we need to develop this idea, discuss amongst ourselves as to how because there are a lot of questions, many questions about teachers. Let's say if the teachers come from India, will their certification be recognized here or not? If there are not enough students in Minnesota alone, can students from Wisconsin come and join their state? So there are so many questions like that. But first basic question is there enough interest from the children or from the parents? Without students, it doesn't make sense to talk about even starting a charter school, right? So this, maybe it'll gain some traction because the president is here, the Gune are all here, and Darala is also here. His wife is also interested. That lady was also advising us. So if we all think this is a good idea, or this also could be part of a program where we can locate another maybe 100, 200 acres 1 hour outside Minnesota to start a Tibetan community separately, so that younger generation, small kids can go to that, live in that community with the parents, grandparents. The parents can come and work in St. Paul or Minnesota, go back on weekends, spend time with grandparents, children, and to create a microcosm of our community, so that we will be in a position to start charter schools. Even if we start here, if we are able to if we manage to fulfill all the conditions, with the reason why you kept the in summer, if we are able to take this forward, let's see how much traction we're able to gain. If the community is interested, I'll send my education minister also to discuss with you and see how best we can move this forward.
Any other questions? Please raise your hand.
Just let you know. You two are saying that the Chitagi Peugeot Takare Shuleme Topatamagi, she Nuchurun Baratape, Tonatido, Kundula Chapsi, Genking into Shudukan, Mogochorene, that can Kumoran logic, Dashe, Geminium the Devache, Yamohandechon, Yaman Geminium the Devache, Hochu, and all these trust.
Yeah, when we talk about dealing with China, that is the most difficult part. That's what we have been struggling over the last 60 years. Of course, through the middle way is our official policy that not just one Sikyong or Kasha can decide or change. If there has to be a change, there has to be a proper process of referendum in future whenever the need arises. But otherwise, we still follow the middle way approach. And the middle way approach is based on the means of non-violence. It should be mutually beneficial, both for China as well as Tibetans, and it should be lasting, right? And it should be a negotiated solution, peacefully. So two things we have to realize. One, through the middle way approach, if we want to resolve the Tibetan, I don't like to call it Tibetan issue because it reduces the importance of the cause. So right now we call it the Sino-Tibet conflict. So to raise the profile of the cause. One thing we have to realize is that without talking with the Chinese, Sino-Tibet conflict cannot be resolved. The other more important thing is that we will, of course, we have been trying to reach out to the international community. But what we should realize is that no nation will put aside their national interests and take up the cause of Tibet. That you should not imagine. These are the two realities. So if you realize these two realities, then you know how to work, right? But under the present circumstances, under President Xi Jinping, there's a lot of uncertainty in China itself. We're talking about third term of Xi Jinping, he's not traveling anywhere, he's not willing to take risk. So we have to wait till March next year, October this year, March next year. We will also have to watch developments post-Ukraine, what's going to happen to Russia and its ally, China. What role has China been playing so far? What role will China play for the next few months to come? And what could be the consequences of those actions? How will the international community look at China? What could be the new global order, whether it's going to be multipolar, bipolar? If it's multipolar, who are going to be the key players? And what are the opportunities for Tibet? So right now, we should be taking up, because we should not be wasting time, but we should be reaching out to governments as much as possible. We see this changing scenario of how people look at China now, including Europe. So we have to reinforce our advocacy work in Europe. In the United States is okay. Because of His Holiness, we have had a very good relationship. Even now, just last month I was there at President Biden's government keenness is shown through the appointment of the special coordinator for Tibet very early in his term. So you have the special coordinator, we came this side, then she came to, and she'll be visiting Minnesota next month. Yeah, okay, because she said something like July, but I said I'm going this month, so maybe she delayed a little bit, but she's coming here, so you'll get to meet her, and she's very interested, of course very proactive also, unlike many of the special coordinators before, right? So, and one of her responsibilities is also negotiation on Tibet. She has to report to the Congress every year. The last report came just few days before on the status of negotiation. So we'll try to reach out to the Chinese government as much as possible. But then right now, the situation is not conducive. So the first step that we wanted to take was to point out to the Chinese government the wrong policies and programs that the Chinese government implements inside Tibet that are not beneficial to the Tibetans as a people and to China as a government. So this is going to be our first step, but we have to look at the right opportunity when to present these cases. But in the meantime, we have to prepare ourselves. That is why we are coming out to reach out to the younger generations of Tibetans to play a more proactive role in carrying forward the movement. So the pressure is built on the Chinese government, and the change in narrative is also to build pressure on the Chinese government to come on the negotiating table. So if we don't talk, there's no way forward, right? Now, I'll leave it at that.
So Sikyong, you spoke a lot about the importance of continuity and youth participation. I would say that one of the biggest turnoffs for youth to engage in Tibetan cause and community is the divisiveness in the community, especially on political issues. And in Tibetan communities, there is a lack of being able to have objective, meaningful political discourse. And even here in Minnesota, there are like Sikyong Penpa Tsering supporters and opposers that even refuse to sit and eat together. There is that level of disunity. So using your influence and support, how will you promote unity for all Tibetans?
It's natural to have differences of opinion. Even during Buddha's time, we are all supposed to be Buddha's followers. Even during Buddha's time, there was no unity. So I cannot command unity. But what I can do is I can strive to bring unity, right? Just yesterday I met somebody who said, I didn't support you during the elections, but after seeing what you did in the last 1 year, now I support you. So we see these changes every year. Nothing is static, right? Now people has to be, some people believe that I'm very conservative. And I tell the younger generation, you guys are more conservative than us, because I follow His Holiness. And His Holiness, I consider His Holiness as the most liberal. He looks at the conditions and situation and decide, not force on, not stay put on one particular position, right? So people who don't support me or who don't like me personally, I don't know how many of them have met me. I don't know how many of them know what I think. If there are questions, I'm willing to answer everywhere. I'm willing to have debate anywhere on any given issue, but it has to be reasonable. It just cannot be emotional. That's why I say study your history, because a lot of the problems of these chokas, Dodo, Dome, Uzang, is because of history. If you don't understand your own history, then you won't know. That's why these days I keep talking openly about the problems that we had in our community. I was born in '66, right? And 2 years after that, Kongbo issue came up, whether Kongbo is part of Kambao or Kongbo is part of Uzang. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can all make out what benefit we have derived from those conflicts. We don't own even 1 inch of land, and we are still fighting about territory in exile. How stupid can we be? Now, if we realize all this, then we know that it's not worthwhile fighting about these things. That's why I'm trying to reconcile even Rangzen Umalam, just what I said a few minutes before. We don't need to have any conflicts. If you're having conflicts about territories, then that we can resolve only after we go back to Tibet in some form, right? And it has to be, sitting here in exile, we can't decide for Tibetans inside Tibet. If we are talking about a particular community being part of this or that, it is the aspiration, we have to consider the aspiration of that community. It should not be the interests of the warring parties, right? So all this, you have to be a little more open-minded to be able to discuss things. Some people don't even come for meetings. Then you don't listen. So in Buddhism we say, no, kabup, cup that is overturned. So how much ever water you pour in it, nothing will hold, right? So you have to be open-minded. First listen, even with your adversary, to fight with the Chinese, you have to listen to what Chinese are saying. So within the Tibetan community, we should be able to converse, communicate, right? And if you have watched me during the election, this election, 2021, I didn't go out of my house to campaign. I took some principled position. So one thing, of course, because of pandemic, even if I get few more votes, if it costs lives, how will that benefit us? Then people were accusing me of not taking part in any debates. I can't say the American system is the best system. I won't accept that. You know, we don't need to copy everything American. Here in America, it's dual, presidential campaign, presidential debates and all that. But when we have debates, either you have to be very truthful, and if the other person lies, I'm going to point it out. If I do that, then his followers doesn't like. So to avoid all this, I said, I'm not going to discuss about any other candidates, good or bad. Only thing I did was take up issues every single Saturday and talk to people. So that shows my intention that I don't want any more divisiveness in the community. So people who have not been supporting me earlier, now they're changing their minds. Slowly they are coming together. And that's a good sign. So I told His Holiness also, if you look at the response from people wherever we went, from Ladakh to Uttarakhand to northeast to South India, the whole of people were very, except for few, most of the people were coming together. And this is a good beginning in my first year, right? Despite my 20 years of service in the parliament. Now, why are people saying that? You have to look at those issues. What are people saying against me? People don't know me. Just because some people said that Penpa Tsering is against this or that, they just took it at the face value and then thought. They have no mind to analyze of their own. So namju korba, seju chela. Namju khona milwa. Machina, and chebache yomarwa. So anybody who has a difference with me, come forward at the meetings. That's why I said I don't want grand receptions. People line up on the road, metoki, parki. It's all a waste. Come for the meetings. Ask the right questions. If you don't come for the meetings, don't ask questions. After I go, I won't care what you say in social media. Right now I'm here. Come, ask questions. That's your right. Answering is my right. I have to be responsible. I have to be accountable. I have to be answerable to the public. Whether it's somebody who likes me or doesn't like me, I don't care. I told the bureaucrats in Dharamsala also, what you did before I came is different. It's all gone. I don't care. What matters to me is what starts from now. I will trust my bureaucrats. Now, whether they will live up to it or not, it's up to them. Our relationship starts now. That's what I tell them. So, then we are going to reach nowhere. That's why I talked about equitableness, I talked about cooperative effort, I talked about the way forward, going forward. So if you focus only on old things, we will not ever be able to move forward. So divisiveness is going to go down, and I, for one, am saying that just by talking, it doesn't help. I have to prove by working. And we are working very hard right now. Everybody is worried about my health. I used to be 104 at one time, kilos. Now I'm 77, and people think I'm sick. I'm not sick, I'm fine. We're just working like being chased by a mad dog right now, because we have time frame. In the next 2 months, I won't be traveling much, but we'll be doing a lot of analysis, planning for the next 3 years. So whatever we do with in a planned manner. So for that, we have to get some things done. If I don't see, because in Dharamsala now there are a lot of young staffers with good qualification, but they lack in experience. So wherever we go, I always take people with me, young staffers. We talk about empowerment, but we don't do anything that empowers people. You know, when I was in representative here, before I became the representative, only one person from our office had gone to the Congress only once, that too when I was the speaker with me. If you want to empower people, you have to take younger generation of Tibetans with you. So last time I brought the additional secretary from DIIR, we brought one staffer from finance department to talk with PRM, USAID, GRL. Then 상물로 냠뇨사 쪽으로 봐, 냠도 튀니. 냠뇨사만 주는 가르치신 거래니. So these people come with us, and then they attend the meetings, they know what we are talking about, how people are responding. Then we also analyze what, okay, kurang tangi disungswa, disungdu sama nganzo kowa dilang korda. Nganzo pa this level imbas. 상만 dinle chini learn chegore maado chigi. Kala 때문에 신치는 때 요말와. 냠뇨사 쪽으로 와. So we have to prove ourselves through our deeds that we are sincere, we are not divisive, not at all. If people perceive me like that, it's their problem, not my problem. But we have to try to convince them as much as possible through our work, not by words.
I have a question about the Umilam policy. So I think a lot of people's worry about the Umilam is that we're no longer Tibetans, that we're being part of China. I didn't know a lot about the Umilam until 2015 or so. And I took some time with my friends to dig deep into it and learn a little bit about the history. I'm not too versed on the Tibetan history, and I still need to do work. But my question is, you've traveled around to a lot of Tibetan communities. I'm just wondering, how do you perceive that the majority of Tibetans, are they well versed in the Umilam? Do they understand what it is? Because I feel like a lot of younger generations take their time to read and understand it. But I think, sorry, I'm a little nervous. I think older generation trying to understand the whole policy and where we're going is truly important. So I'm just wondering if you've noticed the understanding of Umilam in different generations, in different communities.
The older generation, they don't know, they have a lot of trust in His Holiness. Mm-hmm. And His Holiness doesn't take any decision lightly, that I can tell you for sure. It has to be years of analysis that he does, understanding the situation. Only then he takes a decision. So I follow His Holiness not out of blind faith. Whenever His Holiness takes a decision, I question myself as to why His Holiness is doing this, why His Holiness is saying this, why His Holiness has decided on this. And there's always wisdom in His decision. Yeah. So here the concern about not being Tibetan or Tibetan citizen, but you have to become a Chinese citizen. Forget about independence. Another 20, 30 years down the line, if we are not able to go back to Tibet, even autonomy may not make sense. I asked this question to some Amdos, because I'm part Amdo, so it's easier instead of antagonizing some other Choga. So I tell the Amdos, okay, if we get autonomy, let's say, for the all of 3 provinces together or separately, whatever, would you want Siling to be part of Amdo or not? Then they think, okay, there must be a catch there. So they think a little bit, but the answer is always emotional. Of course, Siling has to be part of Amdo, because Siling is the biggest city in Amdo, right? Then the next question I ask is, how many people are there in Siling area? Then nobody knows, because Tibetans are very bad with numbers, right? You just Google it, 2.2 million people in Siling administrative zone. Now, out of 2.2 million people, how many Tibetans? About 50,000. So from 59 till now, when we answer this question, how many Tibetans are there? It's always 6 million, 6 million. From 59 till now, it has been 6 million, no change. Right? Now it may be closer to 7 million, because it's still very difficult to analyze the data that is given by Chinese demography 2020 census. So we still don't know exactly, but could be more closer to 7 million. So even if it's 7 million, and normally Tibetans would say, oh, here Amdos are less, Khampas are less, Ubisang are more in exile, but inside Tibet we are all almost same. So if it's 6 million, it's 2 million Amdos, 2 million Khampas, and 2 million Uzang, right? So now in that sense, if it is 2 million Amdos, in Siling area alone, it's 2.1 million Chinese. Then you think about other areas. The railways opened up, right, from Kormo to Lhasa. Kormo was a small town at one time. Now Kormo is growing, all with Chinese population. On all sides of Tsongombo, you have a lot of mining areas. Most of the miners are Chinese. Then you have Chinese business people who move into towns and cities, only towns and cities where they can make money, not to other rural areas. So in Amdo alone, you are talking about how many Chinese now? And who is the majority? If there is no Tibetan identity, just country, land alone will not help. You need people. So the first thing is to preserve your identity. Without your identity, Tibetans don't speak Tibetan. In Tibet, China forces Tibetans not to speak Tibetan. If there is no Tibetan identity, what will you do with the land of Tibet? And then if you think more broadly, then again the question is, even if it's a Tibetan ruler, and the Tibetan ruler is tyrannical, how does that help us? At one time, I used to hate all Chinese when I was younger. Now, listening to His Holiness, Chinese people are also human beings. They also want happiness. Our problem is with the Chinese leadership, not the ordinary Chinese. Then you think more broadly. You have a very narrow-minded thinking, which doesn't fit in this modern world, and then you reach nowhere. But the reality is now you go to Tibet, see for yourself. That's why some of my friends who are in Canada and United States, they used to tell me, oh, we want to go there because we will get US citizen and then be able to go to Tibet, which I may not be able to do right now, living in India with the identity certificate. So now you have the opportunity to go to Tibet, see for yourself. If the Chinese government doesn't grant visa, then you write to the Congress. Quote RATA, reciprocal access to Tibet. That becomes one more case for the US government to tell China that you are not being reciprocal in your international relations. So go see for yourself, not just once. See the changes that are taking place inside Tibet. Right. Then only you will understand how alarming the situation is. It's a matter of the survival of the Tibetan national identity. If the Tibetan national identity itself is destroyed, then what more career the struggle here? What makes us different? It's our language, our religion, our culture, our way of life, which can contribute to make this world a better place to live in. We have the potential. That's why His Holiness is so popular.
And so with that,
next time, I would really like to spend a little more time. This time, we are hard pressed for time. I was this Minnesota, but even need there but tomorrow I have to reach there in GC. This was so just this morning we left from San Francisco. We arrived here. Some meeting dates. We came here, we were late. I'm really sorry, but next time I really hope to spend a little more time and interact more freely so that you can get as much information. Whatever I know, I'll be willing to tell you, but we need time.